From the outside, Henry Armitage's life sparkled with everything a person could want: a colossal fortune, a palatial estate, and a beautiful wife by his side. Yet behind the marble columns and manicured gardens of his mansion lay a labyrinth of betrayal and long-hidden secrets, secrets that exploded into the public eye the day Claire, his pregnant wife, appeared at the courthouse, twins in tow. Across the aisle stood Jade, the notorious mistress, in a desperate plea for Henry to reject the children he never dreamed would exist. No one in attendance knew that the battle for wealth, power, and pride was about to consume their lives forever. Henry Armitage was not born into wealth. In fact, his earliest memories included the cramped kitchenette of a small apartment in rural Pennsylvania, where each winter draft seeped through the cracks in the thin walls. The eldest of 3 siblings, Henry learned the value of self-reliance and ambition at a tender age, delivering newspapers at dawn before school and helping his mother in a local diner once his classes ended. His father, an old-fashioned tradesman, instilled in him the belief that wealth was merely a byproduct of relentless determination and honesty. Or so Henry thought when he was still a hopeful adolescent. By the age of 25, Henry had transformed his knack for technology into a small startup that specialized in custom software solutions for local businesses. It was around this time that he met Claire Davenport, a poised and graceful woman from Boston whose upbringing diverged greatly from his. Claire was refined, well-educated, and a graduate of Wellesley College, where her parents had also attended. She was an only child, the daughter of real estate mogul Jonathan Davenport, a man who prided himself on forging alliances with people who showed promise. From the first conversation Henry had with Claire, he was captivated by her. She possessed a quiet resolve, an aura of sophistication that intrigued him. Their courtship was a swirl of social events, late-night walks by the Charles River, and shared dreams about building an empire together. The early days of their romance were blissful, filled with passionate nights and whispered promises of a future they both desired more than anything. When Henry's company landed a lucrative contract with a prestigious investment firm, he found himself catapulted into a new stratosphere of business. Suddenly he had the means to rub shoulders with the elite. His budding success caught the eye of major tech investors, including Michael Bloomberg, who once briefly mentioned Henry's forward-thinking business model as promising during a private corporate gathering in New York. It was a fleeting quote, but the mention by a billionaire gave Henry the spark he needed to ascend further. He expanded aggressively, recruiting top talent from Silicon Valley and opening offices in major cities across the country. During this meteoric rise, Henry and Claire married in a lavish ceremony at a historic estate in the Berkshires. The event was covered by society columns with glimpses of Henry's humble roots woven into the otherwise grand narrative of wealth and privilege. Claire's father, though initially wary of Henry's fast-track success, eventually embraced him, proud to see his daughter align herself with a man who had both vision and drive. But something changed as Henry's wealth multiplied. The humility that once guided him through teenage chores and midnight coding sessions began to erode under the glare of unlimited possibilities. He found himself invited to exclusive events, private galas in Manhattan penthouses, fundraisers at grand estates in Europe, where name-dropping Elon Musk or Richard Branson was as casual as discussing the weather. Although Claire accompanied him to most of these gatherings, her attention often drifted to philanthropic causes, focusing on charitable pursuits and volunteer work. In the midst of it all, Henry's gaze started to wander. He became enchanted by the glitz, the endless flow of champagne, and the fascinating world of billionaires who indulged every whim without question. That was the moment he first met Jade Wheeler, a rising star in the world of haute couture fashion. She was a model with mesmerizing green eyes and a magnetic aura that drew men and women to her. The moment they locked eyes at a fundraiser in Miami, orchestrated by the philanthropic arm of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, an unspoken tension formed between them. Henry, intoxicated by the thrill of success and unaccustomed to so much temptation, found himself sailing on dangerous waters. While Claire believed in his moral fiber, trusting him implicitly, Henry started to consider if fidelity was just another ideal easily swept aside by affluence and a dash of secrecy. That question would soon slice through the core of everything he and Claire had built together. At the end of that year, the reflection Henry saw in the mirror was already beginning to fracture. He was still the millionaire tech mogul, but something about him had changed. And though he couldn't articulate it, there was an ever-growing hunger in his gaze, a hunger that would eventually lead him into the arms of Jade Wheeler, setting the stage for scandal and heartbreak that could tear his world apart. Temptation rarely makes its entrance with fanfare and fireworks. It often slips in subtly cloaked in innocuous compliments and sideways glances. For Henry, it materialized in one unassuming phone call. Jade Wheeler, introduced to him by a mutual friend in the fashion industry, dialed his number to discuss a potential collaboration with his philanthropic foundation. Jade, renowned for her philanthropic runway shows, wanted to pitch an ambitious charity event intended to merge technology and fashion, a futuristic spectacle that would raise funds for underprivileged youth programs. Initially, Henry saw it as an opportunity to do good, while also furthering his brand's philanthropic profile. His public relations advisors had been urging him to secure a more visible philanthropic identity, something that would resonate with both the media and the upper echelons of society. Jade's proposal was bold and cutting-edge, perfectly aligning with Henry's business acumen and forward-thinking tech mindset. The synergy felt electric, and they quickly agreed to meet to discuss details over lunch in Manhattan. In the days leading up to their lunch, Henry found himself thinking about Jade more than he was comfortable admitting. He tried to justify the flutter in his stomach by focusing on the potential impact of the event. Together they could raise millions, bridging gaps in education and healthcare. After all, that was the point of wealth, wasn't it? To use it for good? He told himself that a sense of moral duty was the reason he was so invested. However, Henry couldn't ignore the memory of their first eye contact in Miami, a moment that felt stolen from a romance novel. When Jade had stood on that stage describing her vision for an inclusive fashion industry, Henry saw more than a philanthropic partner. He saw a woman who exuded confidence and embodied a lifestyle of glamour he'd become increasingly drawn to. The lunch at a sleek, members-only restaurant in Midtown was a whirlwind of animated conversation about cross-industry collaboration, educational grants, and the philanthropic potential of bringing tech advancements to children in need. Jade's voice was as captivating as her posture poised, assured, brimming with self-made ambition. She had grown up in a small town in Texas, and like Henry, she had clawed her way to success. They shared a bond in that hustle, each having tasted financial hardship in their past. Now both were tasting the sweetness of triumph. Outside the restaurant's tinted windows, reporters and paparazzi vied for glimpses of them, but Henry's security detail kept them at bay. The mania of flash photography seemed almost romantic from inside their luxurious bubble. 2 hours passed like minutes, the conversation meandering from philanthropic pursuits to personal anecdotes. Jade giggled over old modeling fiascos, wardrobe malfunctions, mispronounced names in foreign cities, while Henry recounted his early coding disasters that once cost him a small fortune in refunds. By the time dessert arrived, there was a palpable tension. Jade leaned in, not quite crossing into Henry's personal space, but close enough to blur the lines between professional courtesy and something more. As she sipped her espresso, her eyes fixed on Henry's in a look that suggested secrets might be exchanged in the soft hush of an elevator ride or a discreet corner booth. When they parted ways, Henry felt unsettled. He told himself nothing had happened, nothing real anyway. It was just a potent swirl of curiosity, respect, and physical attraction. "It's all in your head," he repeated to himself, expecting the feeling to dissipate. But as he got into his limousine to head back to his office, the memory of her perfume lingered in the air, making him wonder if temptation had already planted its seed, ready to grow wild if nurtured. That evening, Claire noticed Henry was distant. Seated at their dining room table, a 12-seater too large for just the two of them, she asked him about his day. He offered a truncated version. "Went well. Potential philanthropic event. Busy, though." Claire, with her sensitive intuition, sensed a barrier, but assumed it was simply work stress. She reached across the table, placing her hand over his, offering reassurance without pressing him further. Little did Claire know that her husband's silence wasn't merely about business pressure, and Henry, gazing at his wife's trusting eyes, felt a pang of guilt. He told himself it was just a fleeting distraction. He reasoned he would soon be back to his industrious self, that he wouldn't risk the sanctity of his marriage for a fleeting allure. But in the silent corridors of his mind, a small voice posed the question, what if that allure is more than fleeting? As the weeks passed, Henry's restlessness became more pronounced. Late-night phone calls with Jade under the guise of planning the charity event persisted. Both were night owls by habit, finding solace in the hush of midnight. Their discussions often meandered off-topic, touching on personal philosophies, the responsibilities that came with sudden wealth, even ruminations on the emptiness one can feel amidst throngs of admirers. Each conversation slid further down a slippery slope, transforming from purely professional into something laced with emotional intimacy. Claire, engrossed in her own philanthropic work, she had recently partnered with a local women's shelter, perceived Henry's late-night calls as a testament to his unwavering commitment to charity. Whenever she asked about the event, Henry offered vague replies. He was careful not to provide too many details, especially those that revolved around Jade's involvement. Claire appreciated his work ethic and admired that he put so much energy into a cause, never suspecting that the cause had become entwined with an all-consuming fascination for another woman. For Henry, a cluster of guilt settled in his chest. He tried to brush it aside by overcompensating. He lavished Claire with gifts, a necklace from a renowned French designer, tickets to a Broadway premiere, and even a donation made in her name to a hospital she supported. Although Claire cherished his generosity, she sensed an undercurrent of tension in her husband's eyes. His gestures felt forced, as though he were trying to convince himself of something. One evening, Claire's father, Jonathan Davenport, invited the couple to a high-profile charity gala held at the Boston Public Library. The evening was a tribute to various philanthropic achievements and included an award ceremony. Jonathan was slated to receive an accolade for his lifetime contributions to urban development projects. Henry wore his best tuxedo while Claire shimmered in a sequined gown that highlighted her natural elegance. Yet as soon as they arrived, Henry's eyes began darting through the crowd, scanning for a face that shouldn't be there but might be. Jade, as fate would have it, had indeed been invited. She was part of an avant-garde fashion segment scheduled to punctuate the evening's programming. Henry spotted her from across the marble foyer. She wore a sleek emerald green dress that highlighted her piercing eyes. Her hair, pinned in an elegant updo, revealed her sculpted collarbones. Henry's pulse quickened. He offered to get Claire a glass of champagne, using the excuse to slip away momentarily. As he navigated the throngs of society's elite, Henry's heart pounded in a frenetic rhythm. Upon reaching Jade's side, he spoke her name softly, aware that any overt familiarity could arouse suspicion in this gossip-hungry crowd. She turned, a smile forming instantly, as if she had been waiting for him all along. Their conversation was hushed, carefully ambiguous, yet laden with an unspoken acknowledgement of their clandestine bond. Jade commented on how stunning Claire looked, which only seemed to compound Henry's guilt. She teased him lightly about not returning her text earlier, ensuring her tone remained playful but pointed enough to imply intimacy. Henry, attempting to keep his composure, simply gave a faint nod, placing a gentle hand on her elbow. Before they could say more, a photographer from a local magazine asked to take photos of Jade for the night's coverage. Henry used the interruption to slip away. Grabbing 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter, he returned to Claire, who was conversing with a city council member about new zoning regulations. Claire thanked him with a gracious smile, oblivious to the emotional storm raging within her husband. As the night wore on, Henry felt as though he were living 2 parallel lives. In one, he was Claire's devoted partner, applauding her father as he accepted his award on stage, engaging in polite conversation with donors and city officials, and smiling for the cameras. In the other, he was bound to Jade by a powerful unspoken link that crackled with equal parts desire and dread. Every so often he caught her eye across the room, and in those glances he saw a dangerous question mirrored back at him. How far are we willing to take this? By the time the gala concluded, Henry's mind buzzed with conflict. He was aware that each stolen glance, each secret text message, each conversation forging a deeper connection was eroding the foundation of his marriage. Yet despite the guilt, an undeniable part of him felt alive, as if the taboo nature of this flirtation ignited something in his spirit that success alone couldn't replicate. For better or worse, the cracks in his meticulously crafted facade were beginning to spread, and he wasn't sure he possessed the strength or the will to patch them up. The Tech Meets Couture charity event Henry and Jade had planned materialized in spectacular fashion at a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. The venue was transformed into a glitzy, futuristic labyrinth of neon lights and sleek runways. Robots zipped along serving canapes to a crowd that included high-profile attendees, Tesla engineers, New York's top fashion editors, and even cameo appearances by celebrities who had once walked the Met Gala red carpet. Claire arrived late, having been delayed by a prior commitment at the women's shelter she supported. She hurried into the warehouse, scanning the sea of avant-garde outfits for her husband. When she finally spotted Henry, he was on stage with Jade delivering a speech about the synergy of technology and creativity, and how the funds raised tonight would support vocational training for underprivileged youth. The audience erupted in cheers and applause. Henry looked radiant under the colored spotlights, his voice resonating with confidence. Standing next to him, Jade was a vision in a silver gown that shimmered like liquid metal. Their chemistry was palpable to anyone watching them. Claire observed from the back of the room, her hands clasped together, an uneasy feeling gnawing at her. She couldn't pinpoint the source of her discomfort, but something about Henry's body language, the warmth in his voice when he spoke to Jade, struck her as unusually intimate. She dismissed it as her imagination, even as her heart tightened. After the speech, Henry descended the stage and joined Claire, who congratulated him. "You were amazing up there," she said, forcing a bright smile. Jade walked over, extending a hand for a gracious handshake. "Claire, it's lovely to see you," she greeted, her voice smooth and polished. Claire returned the greeting politely, silently observing the subtle signals between her husband and this charismatic woman. When Henry went to speak to some investors, Claire found herself lingering in Jade's presence. Seeking small talk, Jade mentioned how grateful she was for Henry's dedication to philanthropy. She commended Claire for her own work with the shelter. Claire nodded, acknowledging the compliments, but sensed there was a half-hidden edge in Jade's gaze. "He's a wonderful man," Jade added, her voice layered with a note of possession. Claire, deciding not to take the bait, simply said, "Yes, he is," before excusing herself to mingle with other guests. In the weeks that followed, the event's success propelled Henry's philanthropic status higher than ever. Media outlets praised him and Jade as the dynamic duo bridging the gap between tech and fashion. Almost everywhere, Henry's name was paired with Jade's in press releases and interviews. Claire tried to quell the unease rising in her, telling herself that partnerships like this were common in high society and that business collaborations shouldn't threaten a marriage. Yet doubt nested in her mind. One morning, while Henry was away on a business trip in San Francisco, Claire received a call from an old friend, Caroline Berger, who worked in PR for a major gossip magazine. Caroline sounded distressed. "I thought you should know. A photo of Henry and Jade has been making the rounds internally. It's not definitive, but it's suggestive." Claire froze. She asked Caroline to describe it. "They're at a private after-party. He's got his arm around her in a way that doesn't look professional. The rumor mill is spinning." Claire hung up, her heart hammering. Desperate to rationalize, she imagined a scenario where Henry merely posed with his philanthropic partner for a casual snapshot. But a seed of anxiety was planted. That night, Claire tried to reach Henry, leaving multiple voicemails, but he never picked up. The next day, she discovered he was traveling to Los Angeles instead of returning home, citing a last-minute investor meeting. Meanwhile, Henry was indeed on a plane to Los Angeles accompanied by Jade. He told himself it was strictly business, that they needed to finalize a deal for expanding their charity initiative to the West Coast. But when the plane landed, they found themselves checking into an opulent hotel suite, the reservation made under a shell company's name for the sake of discretion. In the sumptuous privacy of that suite, their professional distance collapsed. Henry crossed the invisible line he had been tiptoeing along for months, consummating the unspoken desire that had been growing since their first conversation. That night became a turning point for both of them. Jade, enthralled by Henry's power and status, sensed the hold she now had on him. For Henry, the guilt was momentarily eclipsed by the intoxication of Jade's presence. Together they formed a bargain, unspoken but clear, that they would continue this liaison in secret, carefully orchestrating their public appearances and private encounters so as not to attract suspicion. But bargains made in the shadows have a way of unraveling in the stark light of reality. Henry returned home to Claire a few days later, carrying with him the weight of an invisible betrayal. Claire, already unsteady from the rumors, tried to cling to normalcy. She confronted Henry about the photo, but he dismissed it as a harmless snapshot taken out of context. Claire wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him because the alternative threatened to destroy her sense of stability. Unbeknownst to Claire, a far more crushing blow was already in motion, one that would bring the entire facade crashing down, irreparably altering all their lives. Claire's intuition, sharpened by months of subtle changes in Henry's behavior, refused to let the matter rest. She wasn't proud of what she did next, but desperation fueled her. She began searching for clues, scouring Henry's text messages and emails whenever he left his phone unattended. She told herself it was the only way to dispel her growing suspicions, or else confirm them once and for all. In a matter of days, she stumbled upon a series of encrypted messages between Henry and an unknown contact labeled simply J. Claire's heart pounded. Each snippet she managed to decrypt told a story of clandestine hotel meetings and coded references to flights taken at odd hours. Eventually, the puzzle pieces assembled into a horrifying picture: Jade Wheeler, her husband's mistress. Claire felt both fury and heartbreak as she read. Guilt also seeped in. She knew she had invaded Henry's privacy. But the betrayal was overwhelming. She sat in the quiet study, tears burning her cheeks, rereading lines that reduced her once strong marriage to a web of lies. Her hands shook. How could she have been so blind? When Henry returned from work that evening, Claire confronted him. She stood in the foyer, arms crossed, phone in hand. "Who is Jade Wheeler to you? And don't lie." Her voice trembled with a blend of rage and sorrow. Henry froze, the color draining from his face. He attempted to maintain composure, denying any involvement beyond the philanthropic partnership. But Claire was beyond placation. She thrust the phone at him, messages on display, and watched as the gravity of the situation contorted his features. Henry's carefully crafted defenses began to crumble under the weight of her evidence. He stumbled over his words, finally admitting to an affair, but insisting it was a mistake, something that meant nothing, something he would end immediately. Claire wanted to believe him. Part of her still clung to the man she fell in love with, the man who once worked tirelessly to provide for his struggling family. Yet the raw pain coursing through her was nearly unbearable. She moved out of their bedroom that night, retreating to a guest suite in the mansion, her heart a heavy knot of betrayal. In the weeks that followed, Henry tried to mend the fractured marriage. He severed personal contact with Jade, restricting their interactions to official charity emails. He canceled the next philanthropic event they had planned in Europe, citing unforeseen scheduling conflicts. To the media, he adopted a stoic front, making no mention of a personal crisis. Claire, meanwhile, oscillated between cold silence and tearful arguments. The wounds were too fresh for forgiveness, and the entire household felt it. Henry's contrition seemed genuine. He poured more attention into Claire, attempting to rekindle the closeness they once shared, cooking dinner for her, inviting her for long walks along their estate's gardens, offering to attend her charity events. Claire, despite her hurt, recognized a flicker of the old Henry in these gestures. Slowly, she allowed small pockets of warmth back into their interactions, though she remained cautious. However, destiny had a cruel twist in store. One afternoon, just as Claire began considering the possibility of marriage counseling, she felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She dismissed it as stress, but when the symptom persisted, accompanied by fatigue and missed periods, she visited her doctor. The physician's smile said it all. Claire was pregnant, and not just with one baby, but twins. This revelation thrust her into emotional turmoil. A part of her rejoiced she had always wanted children. Yet another part raged. Henry had betrayed her, and now, at this most vulnerable moment, she was expected to consider bringing new lives into the world, uncertain about her marriage's stability. Claire wrestled with whether to tell Henry immediately. The relationship was strained, yet she knew he deserved to know. After days of wrestling with the news, she finally broke it to him. She found him in his study, hunched over paperwork. Her voice quivered as she spoke. "Henry, I'm pregnant. With twins." Henry's eyes widened, a mix of awe and guilt. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. Fatherhood had always been a dream for him. He reached for Claire's hands, but she pulled away. "I don't know what this means for us," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. For a fleeting moment, Henry was struck speechless. Then he vowed with a trembling conviction that he would be a father his children could be proud of. He promised to give up anything or anyone that stood in the way of a stable family. Claire studied his face, wanting so desperately to believe him. She said nothing more, leaving the study in a swirl of conflicted emotions. What neither of them knew was that Jade Wheeler had her own stunning news that would tear their fragile truce apart and catapult them all into a public scandal from which none of them could emerge unscathed. 2 weeks after Claire broke the news of her pregnancy, Henry found himself in the midst of an intense board meeting, hashing out the future direction of his tech empire. His phone buzzed repeatedly, but he ignored it, too engrossed in negotiations. Once the meeting finally concluded, he checked his missed calls and texts. All were from Jade. He stepped into the corridor, bracing himself. Since confessing his affair, he had tried to keep contact with Jade strictly formal, believing the affair was over. But Jade's voicemail sounded urgent. The last one chilled him to the core. "Pick up. It's important. It's about a baby." Henry's heart nearly stopped. Panic set in as he called her back. Jade answered instantly, her voice tense and trembling. "I needed to speak to you directly," she said. I'm pregnant." A prolonged silence on the line amplified the gravity of her words. Eventually, Henry let out a disbelieving groan. His mind churned. He had barely accepted Claire's twin pregnancy, and now this. He tried to gather his composure and asked, "How far along are you?" Jade replied, with the time frame indicating that the baby was undoubtedly his. Henry's thoughts ricocheted: the press, his marriage, the future of everything he'd built. Jade seemed equally distraught, but insisted she had no intention of going public if he didn't. Yet her tone also carried a subtle warning. This was a reality he couldn't simply brush aside. Over the following days, Henry wrestled with whether to confess Jade's pregnancy to Claire. His guilt was unbearable. Meanwhile, Jade's calls became more frequent, her pleas alternating between sorrow and threats. She was scared, and a part of Henry felt responsible for ensuring she and the baby were cared for. He offered to fund her medical expenses, even suggesting she relocate temporarily to a less conspicuous neighborhood to avoid paparazzi. Jade consented, but reminded him that hiding forever was impossible. Claire, sensing her husband's renewed tension, pressed him. Late one night, when Henry returned from a meeting that ran suspiciously late, Claire confronted him in the kitchen. Her voice wavered between fear and anger. "What is it this time, Henry? Are you still seeing her?" He shook his head, dreading the confession he was about to make. But lying further would only deepen the chasm between them. So he confessed Jade was pregnant. The sorrow that filled Claire's eyes nearly broke him. She sunk into a chair, one hand protectively over her own belly. "You told me it was over," she whispered. He nodded, stammering that it was indeed over, that Jade's pregnancy was an unexpected consequence of their past liaison, not an ongoing affair. He wanted to do right by everyone, but how Claire spoke through tears. "You've put me in an impossible position. I'm pregnant with twins, and another woman carries your child. How can we ever be a family after this?" Henry had no answer. He knelt by her chair, attempting to grasp her hand, but she recoiled. "I need space," she said, her voice trembling. Claire left for Boston the next day to stay with her parents. Henry, in the eerily quiet mansion, began crafting a damage control strategy, anticipating that Jade's pregnancy might leak to the tabloids. But the news exploded sooner than expected. A paparazzi shot emerged of Jade entering a prenatal clinic. Tabloid headlines boomed millionaire mogul's mistress expecting, and Henry Armitage's secret love child. The story dominated gossip columns within hours. Claire's phone rang incessantly with reporters seeking comments. She refused to answer. Jonathan Davenport publicly expressed disapproval, calling Henry's choices reckless and detrimental in a carefully worded statement. Henry's stock dropped amidst rumors of scandal and personal instability. Jade found herself cornered by the press at every turn, her tearful pleas for privacy fueling the media frenzy. But the final blow came when Jade, feeling hounded and unsure of Henry's commitment, filed a paternity suit. It was a stunning move, practically blackmailing Henry into publicly acknowledging her unborn child. "I don't want to do this," she told him over the phone, tears in her voice. "But I have to protect myself and my baby." A day later, Claire responded with a court filing of her own suit to secure financial and legal protection for her twins, ensuring Henry's obligations were spelled out beyond any dispute. Overnight, Henry's once idyllic world was thrust onto the front pages of newspapers and the screens of celebrity gossip shows. The man who had risen from humble beginnings now faced not just a personal crisis, but a very public legal battle with both his wife and his mistress, each pregnant with his children. Yet little did any of them know the forthcoming confrontation would make every prior scandalous headline look like mere child's play. The courthouse in downtown Boston, an imposing stone building with tall columns, became the stage for an impending spectacle that tabloids christened the Armitage family feud. With media vans lining the street and paparazzi jockeying for prime positions, it felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a theatrical performance. The public, hungry for every morsel of scandal, ate it up. On the day of the first hearing, a preliminary session to address the paternity suits, Henry walked up the courthouse steps, flanked by his high-profile legal team. Dressed in a dark suit, he wore a somber expression, the weight of his circumstances evident in every step. The building's granite exterior loomed over him like a silent judge. Claire arrived separately, determined to maintain her dignity, despite the heartbreak searing through her soul. Her baby bump was starting to show, adding a layer of emotional intensity to the scene. Cameras flashed endlessly as she moved through the crowd. Her head held high, refusing to answer shouted questions about her marriage. She was accompanied by her own counsel and by her mother, who offered a supportive arm. Jade arrived minutes later, shielded by a swarm of photographers. Her round belly was unmistakable, a visible testament to the child she carried. Wearing large sunglasses, Jade looked anxious. She too had lawyers by her side, though not as glamorous or as high-powered as Henry's or Claire's. Onlookers catcalled and jeered, some labeling her a gold digger, and worse. Jade winced at the insults but kept moving, knowing she had crossed a line there was no returning from. The hearing began in a stuffy, wood-paneled courtroom. The judge, an older woman with a firm voice, insisted on decorum, threatening to remove any reporter who disrupted the proceedings. Henry's lawyers argued that the paternity tests should be handled privately, given the sensitive nature of the case. Jade's attorney countered that media scrutiny was not her client's doing, but the result of Henry's broken promises. Claire's counsel remained largely silent, but concurred with the desire for privacy, wanting to protect the unborn twins from the frenzy. In a show of bravado or desperation, no one could be entirely sure, Jade took the stand for a brief statement. She stressed that her sole concern was the welfare of her child. But her voice quivered when she spoke about the harassment she'd endured, about the death threats that had landed in her inbox. She pleaded for the court's protection, even as she insisted Henry acknowledge paternity. Halfway through her testimony, Jade's composure cracked. She cast a furtive glance at Henry, then at Claire, whose expression remained stoic. "I never meant to destroy anyone's marriage," Jade said, tears sliding beneath her sunglasses. I was in love. I thought Henry cared about me, about us. And now I'm scared." The confession hung in the air, tension rippling through the room. Henry's eyes dropped to the table, guilt written across his features. Claire stared forward, unwilling to show any reaction that might betray the emotional havoc within her. When the judge decided to break for lunch, the crowd in the courtroom breathed collectively, as though exhaling after a high-stakes drama. Claire and her mother left quickly, refusing to engage with reporters. Henry stepped out next, bombarded by paparazzi shouting demands for a statement. He muttered no comment while his lawyers tried to shield him. Jade, trailing behind, was the last to exit. In a chaotic moment, a rogue reporter lunged forward, thrusting a microphone in her face, yelling, "Is Henry Armitage the father of your baby? Are you just looking for a payout?" Jade, eyes wet, pleaded. "I don't want any trouble. I just want him to take responsibility." The day's proceedings ended with the judge scheduling a formal hearing on paternity and financial arrangements. No immediate decisions were made, but the stage was set. Gossip channels buzzed about the possibility of Henry facing not one but 2 child support cases from both his wife and mistress. Late-night comedians had a field day lampooning the situation, calling Henry America's most infamous future dad. Back at the Armitage mansion, Henry slumped in his office, exhaustion etched into his brow. He sifted through an endless stream of messages, board members expressing concern, philanthropic partners threatening to distance themselves, and a handful of supportive notes from close friends who urged him to stand by Claire. On her end, Jade huddled in her modest apartment, tears flowing as she watched coverage of her own tearful face plastered across cable news. She felt more alone than ever, deeply regretting that her desperate move to file suit had thrown her into the vortex of public opinion. Yet the most unsettling aspect lay in Claire's silence. Over the next few days, she avoided Henry's calls even as she sorted through her own legal documents. Quietly, she was preparing for a scenario that might end her marriage, a possibility she never thought she'd have to confront. And in the swirling chaos that overshadowed them all, a single question took center stage. Was there any chance of salvaging the lives irreversibly impacted by the avalanche of betrayal and heartbreak? A week after the courthouse spectacle, a new rumor hit the tabloids. Jade was allegedly pleading with Henry to deny the child was his to spare her the relentless media torment. Speculation ran wild. Was she backtracking? Had someone in Henry's camp intimidated her? Or was Jade merely overwhelmed by the cruelty of the public eye? Claire read these headlines from her parents' home, her stomach turning. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Had Jade genuinely changed her mind, or was this a ploy to manipulate Henry? Each possibility stung. She couldn't help but wonder if Jade regretted tangling with a married billionaire now that she'd experienced the ugly side of fame. Meanwhile, Henry's phone blew up with messages from journalists demanding clarity. He offered none. Behind the scenes, Jade reached out to Henry in a series of frantic calls. "I didn't want this kind of life," she sobbed on his voicemail. "I wanted us to be a family, well, the baby and me. But not like this." Henry listened to these messages in tortured silence. He sat alone in his mansion's grand library, a glass of whiskey untouched at his side. The lines between love, lust, responsibility, and regret blurred so badly that he wasn't sure what was right anymore. Amidst the unfolding chaos, a surprising ally emerged. Caroline Berger, Claire's PR friend. She contacted Claire privately and offered to assist with crisis management. Caroline proposed a plan. If Claire could stand next to Henry and present a united front, despite the heartbreak, they could control the narrative, focusing on the unborn twins' future and letting Jade's situation simmer down on its own. But the suggestion revolted Claire. "You want me to pretend everything's fine and do PR spin?" she snapped. "This isn't just about optics. It's my life." Caroline sympathized but insisted that if Claire wanted to save her marriage or at least safeguard her children's reputation, proactive public relations was essential. The court of public opinion can be brutal. At least have your voice heard, she advised, before rumors become the only story people see. Reluctantly, Claire gave in. She returned to the estate, surprising Henry one evening. He was slouched on a couch in the living room, gazing at old photos of them during happier times. Claire noticed a swirl of conflicting emotions in his eyes, relief, self-hatred, and longing. She stood at a distance, arms folded protectively over her swelling belly. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Henry immediately apologized, tears brimming in his eyes. He confessed that Jade's calls unsettled him. She seemed desperate, but he also felt duty-bound to ensure she and the unborn baby were supported. Claire listened, her gaze unwavering. "Our children come first," she replied. "Whatever decision you make about Jade, it can't jeopardize our twins." They spoke for hours, dissecting every angle of their painful reality. By midnight, they decided to issue a carefully worded press statement emphasizing their commitment to co-parenting and confirming that legal matters surrounding Jade's pregnancy were private and ongoing. Henry vowed total transparency going forward, no more secrets. The next morning, Claire and Henry convened with Caroline and a small circle of advisors to finalize the statement. Moments before it went live, a bombshell leaked on social media. Jade had allegedly met with a tabloid journalist, possibly to sell her story. The rumor spread like wildfire. It claimed Jade planned to reveal intimate details of her affair with Henry, overshadowing any controlled narrative Claire and Henry hoped to present. Panicked Claire confronted Henry. "Is she blackmailing you for more money?" she demanded. Henry's face hardened. "I don't know," he whispered, fists clenched. "She always said she didn't want to go public. I can't imagine why she'd do this unless someone offered her a fortune." Within the hour, Jade publicly denied any involvement with tabloid deals. On an impromptu live stream, she appeared, disheveled eyes puffy from crying. She insisted she was being used by unscrupulous journalists who dangled large sums to coax a scandalous interview. She admitted she'd considered it out of desperation, but ultimately refused. Now she was the subject of swirling rumors, her name dragged through the mud, her personal heartbreak splayed across headlines. "I don't want Henry to deny his child," Jade said in the live stream, voice trembling. "I just want peace." Yet social media had a way of twisting words. Some viewers called her a liar, others extended sympathy. Confusion reigned. Claire and Henry's carefully orchestrated press release got lost in the shuffle, overshadowed by Jade's tearful broadcast. That evening, every party involved, Claire, Henry, and Jade, found themselves reeling. A swirl of confusion, betrayal, and regret threatened to engulf them all. The once clear lines of conflict had become muddied by shifting alliances and contradictory headlines. In that vortex of half-truths and broken promises, one thing was certain: the next court date loomed ahead, promising even more shocking revelations that none of them could fully anticipate. On the morning of the final hearing to settle paternity and financial obligations, an uneasy hush blanketed the courthouse. Security had been bolstered to manage the sea of onlookers, reporters, and curiosity seekers hoping to witness the climax of the Armitage saga. The air was thick with anticipation, as if even the ancient stone pillars sensed that this day would be momentous. Claire entered first, flanked by her legal team and her mother, who offered a gentle arm of support. Claire's face bore a resolute calm, her pregnancy now visibly advanced. She wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress that subtly accentuated her baby bump, a reminder to the world of what truly mattered in this quagmire of scandal. Henry arrived next. Though still impeccably dressed, he looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. He cast a glance at Claire, managing a small nod, but her expression remained unreadable. A hush fell over the crowd as Jade slipped through a side entrance. She was noticeably further along in her pregnancy as well, her face troubled. Though public sentiment remained divided, some calling her a homewrecker, others depicting her as a victim. Today, her primary goal was ensuring her unborn child's security. The hearing commenced with the judge reviewing DNA test results, which conclusively established Henry as the father of Jade's child. Although the outcome was expected, the weight of confirmation felt crushing in the hushed courtroom. Claire's eyes flickered with heartbreak as the judge announced Henry's paternity, sealing a reality that no legal maneuvering could alter. Next came arguments regarding child support custody and a financial settlement. Jade's lawyers insisted she required a substantial sum to ensure her child had the best upbringing possible. Claire's counsel countered that while Jade deserved support, the estate should protect Claire's twins from any financial risk. A heated exchange between the lawyers erupted, each side accusing the other of greed, manipulation, or moral failings. Eventually, Jade herself asked to address the court. She spoke hesitantly, voice trembling with emotion. "I never planned for this," she said, glancing between Claire and Henry. "I'm not here to steal anyone's future. I want my child to be recognized and cared for. I may have made mistakes, but this baby didn't ask for any of this." Her words hung in the air, eliciting a hush from the crowd. Claire's resolve cracked. Memories of her own motherly instincts surged, and she found herself unable to hate Jade entirely. This woman carried an innocent child, Henry's child. Regardless of the betrayal that brought them to this moment, Claire realized she and Jade were connected by a complicated thread of fate. The judge, sensing the emotional gravity, called for a short recess. During the recess, reporters scrambled outside for fresh sound bites, capturing Claire and Jade on camera as they stood on opposite ends of the hallway. But in a moment of raw humanity, Claire approached Jade. They stood face to face, each bearing a pregnancy that tied them to Henry forever. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Claire softly said, "We didn't create this mess, but we have to live with it." Tears welled in Jade's eyes, but she nodded in understanding. No apologies were exchanged. None were needed in that moment of silent acknowledgement that both women had been caught in an emotional crossfire that neither fully controlled. When court reconvened, Henry rose from his seat to make his own statement. He began with an apology to Claire, to Jade, and to both unborn children. His voice cracked with remorse. "I failed you," he said, looking at Claire. "And I dragged Jade into it too. I can't fix the past, but I want to do what's right moving forward." He affirmed his commitment to support Jade's child financially and emotionally. He also vowed to uphold all responsibilities as a father to Claire's twins, no matter the state of his marriage. In the end, the judge issued a ruling that recognized Henry as the legal father of both unborn children, requiring him to provide generous financial support to Jade and setting a framework for co-parenting arrangements once the baby was born. Claire's twins would also receive legal protections, ensuring they remained heirs to the Armitage estate. As the final gavel struck, the courtroom erupted in flashes of cameras and frantic shouts from journalists. The outcome was simultaneously triumphant and tragic. Everyone gained a piece of security, yet the emotional toll was incalculable. Outside the courthouse, Claire paused on the top step, feeling a surge of lightheadedness. The stress of the proceedings and her advanced pregnancy converged in a wave of dizziness. Henry, noticing her sway, rushed to her side, supporting her gently. Jade looked on from a short distance, one hand on her own belly, a mix of relief and sorrow reflected in her eyes. For a brief moment, the three of them and their unborn children stood in an almost surreal tableau. A broken family. Yes, but a family, nonetheless bound by regrets and responsibilities that would shape each of their lives forever. In the weeks following the court ruling, life settled into a new, uncertain rhythm. Claire returned to the Armitage mansion, not necessarily to reconcile her marriage, but to rest in familiar surroundings until the twins arrived. She busied herself designing the nursery, selecting soft neutrals for the decor, and carefully picking out cribs, clothing, and baby books. Each preparation, though tinged by sorrow, was also fueled by a mother's love. Henry respected her space. He took to sleeping in a separate suite, focusing his efforts on stabilizing his company, staving off board members concerned that his personal scandal would tarnish the brand. Eventually, his crisis management worked. The furor around his affair softened from a full-blown media explosion to a simmering background story. More importantly, Henry began to see a therapist grappling with why he'd risked everything he loved for fleeting excitement. Though he and Claire had not spoken much of reconciliation, they did share brief tentative conversations about co-parenting once the twins arrived. Meanwhile, Jade moved into a quieter suburb, her living expenses covered by a trust Henry established after the hearing. She found a local obstetrician and prenatal class, determined to move forward with as much stability as she could muster. Though paparazzi still occasionally circled her neighborhood, the general public's appetite for the scandal had waned. In private moments, she questioned her choices. Yes, she had ended up financially secure, but her emotional landscape felt barren. Was it worth the heartbreak, the intrusive headlines, and the endless moral judgment? A few months later, Claire went into labor earlier than anticipated. A frantic drive to the hospital ensued. Henry, alerted by the staff, rushed from a late-night board meeting to be by her side. After hours of painful contractions, Claire delivered 2 healthy baby girls. As she held them in her arms, tears of joy cascaded down her cheeks, mingling with tears of regret that Henry had marred what should have been a purely blissful moment. Henry hovered nearby, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude. The first time he cradled the twins, something in him softened. He kissed Claire's forehead, murmuring, "Thank you. They're perfect." Claire offered a wan smile. Part of her still longed for a world where these babies were born into unwavering love rather than heartbreak. A few weeks later, Jade's time came. She gave birth to a baby boy in a different hospital across the city, attended by a close friend. Though Henry wasn't present in the delivery room, he arrived soon after. Holding his son for the first time, Henry experienced an emotional maelstrom. He thought of the father he once aspired to be, steadfast, honorable, and realized he had a long road ahead to reconcile that dream with his complicated reality. Over time, Henry found a precarious balance. He split his schedule to bond with his daughters at the mansion and visit his son on scheduled days. Claire, still recovering physically and emotionally, occasionally joined these visits. Though they both recognized the lingering tension between them, neither wished for their children to grow up as strangers. Jade, too, understood that forging a cordial co-parenting relationship was in the child's best interest, despite her lingering sadness. Publicly, the Armitage affair gradually faded from headlines. Other scandals took its place, and the world's collective attention marched on. Quietly, Henry continued therapy, grappling with the guilt of having upended so many lives. On a few solemn afternoons, Claire accompanied him. They talked about the possibility of a new start. Though they weren't sure it meant reconciling romantically, they agreed to seek counseling together for the twins' sake. Jade, forging her own path, found a part-time job at a local boutique and began considering ways to raise her son with minimal drama. No fairy tale ending emerged from this tangled web. Instead, life presented a mosaic of pragmatic choices, moments of hope, and lingering regrets. The experience forever changed Henry, Claire, and Jade. It forced them to question their identities, to confront their darkest impulses, and to strive for a semblance of peace amidst the ruin of broken trust. And so, after the courthouse drama and the tabloid frenzy, each faced the future uncertain, yes, but still brimming with the smallest, most precious possibility that in time they might forge a new kind of family. One built not on fairy tale illusions or high society fantasies, but on the hard-won lessons of fidelity, responsibility, and forgiveness. The whirlwind of betrayal and heartbreak that swept through Henry Armitage's marriage might have shattered their world, but it did not extinguish hope. Though both Claire and Jade found themselves in difficult roles, one wife, one mistress, time gradually softened resentment into cautious acceptance. In the end, everyone chose to prioritize the children, forging bonds that didn't fit neatly into any traditional framework. Lessons were learned about the true cost of secrets, the value of honesty, and the importance of atonement in the face of broken promises. If you found yourself captivated by the drama, the twists, and the human struggle within this story, please support our channel by liking the video, sharing it with friends, and subscribing so you don't miss the next compelling tale. Your engagement helps us continue exploring the complexities of life and relationships, bringing you more stories that touch the heart and spark conversation. Thank you for watching and reading.